What if I told you that in just 30 years, 20 million private companies sprang up in China, a nation that was once steeped in anti capitalist doctrine? And what if I told you that these companies, which started with almost nothing, facing every imaginable obstacle, managed to surpass state owned enterprises that had been given every advantage imaginable? This shouldn't be possible. And yet it happened. Let me show you the most bizarre feature of China's economy, one that reveals everything about how business actually works in the world's second largest economy. It's a story of two completely different worlds existing side by side. One is paradise, the other is jungle. And understanding which companies live in which world is key to understanding how China really operates. Here's the paradox that nobody outside China truly understands. If you're a large state owned enterprise in China, the gates of paradise swing open. Guarantees, loans, and contracts effortlessly come your way. If you're lucky enough to operate in a strategic industry like telecom or energy, you enjoy monopolistic power that could catapult you into the ranks of global giants. Banks lend to you at 5% interest. You get priority access to stock markets, permits, and licenses. No problem. The government wants you to succeed. But if you're a small or medium sized private company, welcome to the jungle. High entry barriers, exorbitant cost of capital, endless bureaucratic red tape. Want to set up shop or break ground on an office building? You need hundreds of approvals from a Byzantine network of district, municipal, and provincial governments. Banks won't lend to you. And if they do, you're paying 3 times the interest rate that state owned enterprises pay. Logic would suggest that in this environment, state owned enterprises would dominate forever, private companies would wither and die. But here's what actually happened. In 1990, private enterprises accounted for a negligible share of China's economic output. 20 years later, they accounted for more than half. Today, private firms account for 50% of tax revenue, 60% of GDP, 70% of innovation, and 80% of urban jobs. Let that sink in. The companies living in the jungle didn't just survive, they thrived. They surpassed the companies living in paradise. How is this possible? To understand this story, I need to take you back to 1960 seconds. China, to a boy who started collecting cigarette butts at age 7 to make money. His name was Nian Guangzhu. By age 9, he was helping his parents sell fruit. As an adult with no formal education, Nian took whatever odd jobs he could find. In the 1960 seconds, he was arrested and sentenced to a year in prison. His crime? Making money as a middleman. This was considered financial speculation, strictly forbidden at the time, even as China began gradually opening to private enterprise in the late 1970 seconds. Private vendors had to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Nian was thrown in prison again, this time for selling fish and chestnuts. After his release, a neighbor hired him to help prepare and sell melon seeds. Nian quickly mastered the skill. But melon seeds were rationed goods, so private sale was illegal. His goods were confiscated regularly. Yet he persisted. In 1981, the government decided to make it legal to set up small businesses under tight restrictions. Nian seized the moment. He set up vendor stands at fixed locations, selling melon seeds with a unique flavor he'd developed. He also had a reputation for giving customers more seeds than he charged them for, which earned him the nickname Fool. Taking this as a compliment, he adopted it as his brand name, Fool's Melon Seeds. Chinese people love melon seeds. They enjoy cracking them open with their teeth and teasing out the soft kernels. And Nien's seeds were delicious. People stood in long lines in front of his stands. Before long, he earned his first RMB 1 million, a dizzying sum in those days. A humble melon seed vendor had become a millionaire. But success brought danger. As the Chinese saying goes, humans should avoid getting famous, and pigs should avoid getting chubby. Nian hired young people to work his growing number of stands. When his employees mushroomed to 12, alarms went off. Under Chinese law at the time, private businesses could employ at most 8 workers. Beyond that, you were considered a capitalist exploiter. Nian had crossed the line. This created an enormous headache for the Chinese government. Here was a nearly illiterate vendor of melon seeds who had become wildly successful. His business was undeniable proof that private enterprise could work. But how could the state reconcile this with Marxist orthodoxy? Marx's theory said that hiring wage laborers was exploitation. Should they shut Nian down or let him continue? The case became such a political hot potato that it eventually reached the desk of Deng Xiaoping himself. In October 1984, at a high-level meeting, Deng made a momentous decision: Fool's melon seeds would be allowed to stay in business. The implications were enormous. The 8-employee limit was effectively removed. Private businesses would be allowed to expand. The issue of worker exploitation would not be invoked to control private enterprise. For anyone reading the tea leaves, the message was clear. China was serious about allowing private business to grow. Entrepreneurs seized this opportunity with both hands. They worked feverishly to grow their businesses. And they understood something crucial. They would have to work harder and take more punishment than state-owned enterprises, possibly even go to jail. But they also saw an opportunity that state enterprises couldn't match. These first-wave entrepreneurs were largely like Nian, cast from the same mold. They'd grown up in poverty with little formal education. They'd never tasted the privileges of life inside the Chinese bureaucracy. They were truly proletarian. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. They became skilled at spotting loopholes in policies and regulations, identifying arbitrage opportunities, circumventing restrictions. Their strategy was like commuters driving to work: speed through green lights, run the yellow, and drive around any that had turned red. Their willingness to bend or break rules and their skill at doing so opened lucrative economic opportunities that would have eluded more scrupulous state enterprises. Let me tell you about Lu Guanqiu. Born into a poor peasant family in Zhejiang province, after China was hit by 3 successive years of natural disasters in the late 1950s and early 1960s, he lost his job as a blacksmith's apprentice. He started a rice and flour mill. His business was shut down. To pay off debts, he was forced to sell the 3-room farmhouse left to him by his grandfather. But Lu didn't give up. In 1969, he began repairing farm machinery. With 6 helpers, he started producing automotive products. By emphasizing high quality and low prices, he became the first private businessman in China to sell products in the United States. Despite his success, Lu remained humble. He never moved his offices out of the unassuming 2-story gray brick house where he started. The second wave of entrepreneurs was different. Many were former senior government officials or well-connected elites. Well-educated and groomed for lifetime job security and high social status, they were willing to give up their iron rice bowl their guaranteed government jobs, and plunge into the turbulent seas of business. With their social connections, they aimed to start high-end businesses. Liu Yonghao embodied this second wave. In 1982, he and his three brothers all quit state sector jobs to launch a business together. Within 8 years, they owned the biggest livestock feed producer in China. In 1995, they created 4 separate companies, each managed by one brother. Liu became a member of the National People's Political Consultative Conference, a powerful advisory body. He proposed establishing a state-sanctioned bank to promote private sector development. The result was Minsheng Bank, listed on the Shanghai Stock Exchange in 2000. But here's what made this all work: the relationship between private companies and local government. Remember the mayor economy I told you about? Local officials needed private companies to succeed. Good private firms create jobs, generate tax revenue, boost local GDP. This scores political points for officials. So, despite the official rhetoric about state enterprises being superior, local officials were actively supporting private businesses. One study found that 9 vice mayors in a southern city spent most of their time prospecting for new businesses, each being the point person for about 30 private firms. Their official duties had nothing to do with business development, but that's where they spent their time. This created what I call the old model of state-private collaboration. It was informal, sometimes illegal, but incredibly effective. Entrepreneurs and local officials would share the fruits of these new market-driven entities. They'd wine and dine together, sing karaoke, bend regulations to the breaking point. As the famous Chinese saying goes, reforms start with breaking rules. Local governments could give out licenses, contracts, cheap land, direct loans from local banks. They could make new laws or sidestep old ones. They could give permits, lobby the central government for exemptions. This informal collaboration, this guanxi, translated into real monetary value. But the relationship wasn't altruistic. Local officials got benefits too: gray income, illegal bribes, high-end trips, resort accommodations, overseas tuition for their children, cash transfers, equity stakes in private businesses given to family members. This was crony capitalism, Chinese style, and it worked. From this unlikely brew of collaboration, millions of private corporations were born in the 1990s and early 2000s. But the system also bred massive corruption, which brings me to 2013. President Xi launched a major anti-corruption drive, cutting deeply into the illicit relationship between private firms and political power. Since 2013, more than 2.3 million officials at various levels have been punished for violating party rules or state laws. From elite tigers to common household flies. In 2017 alone, 527,000 officials were punished. This forced the state-private relationship to evolve into new, more legal forms. And here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of the old model of bribes and gray income, a new model emerged: equity partnerships. Remember the Neo story from the Mayor Economy episode? In April 2020, Neo was on the brink of bankruptcy. The Hefei government stepped in with RMB 7 billion, about $1 billion, in exchange for a 25% stake. Neo moved its headquarters to Hefei. The government helped secure loans from 6 large state banks. They organized a supply chain. Over the next year, Neo's production grew 81%. Its valuation went from $3 billion to $100 billion. Everyone won. Hefei attracted a high-quality enterprise. They created employment. They made a name for themselves. And they made a handsome profit from owning NEO stock. This is the new model. Governments, through their state-owned enterprises, become equity owners of prominent private businesses. They're not just regulators, they're investors, they're partners. A fascinating study that looked at every registered Chinese firm, 37 million of them as of 2019, revealed the scale of these connections. Private owners with state connections owned about a third of the capital registered by these companies. There were more than 100,000 private owners who had joint ventures with state owners in 2019, a five-fold increase compared to 2000. And here's the stunning part. 63 out of the 100 largest corporate owners, measured by registered capital, are state players. But every single one of these state owners has a joint venture with a private company. Every single one. This creates a massive network of interlocking ownership. When a state-owned enterprise forms a joint venture with private firm A, then A is directly linked to the state. If firm A forms a joint venture with private firm B, then B is indirectly linked to the SOE. Private firm B might become a shareholder of private firm C, making C also indirectly connected to the original SOE. These layers of equity relationships form a mega corporate conglomerate. Many private enterprises welcome state stakeholders. After all, engaging a local government or a connected SOE has many advantages. Use connections to tap local resources, link distribution networks, obtain hard-to-get licenses, get political protection. All of this would require substantial time and resources for a private company, assuming it weren't utterly impossible. And for state agencies, working with capable private managers makes good economic sense. It's the most productive use of state resources. But the collaboration only works when the state is a minority shareholder, letting managers and entrepreneurs make key business decisions free of political interference. But this system has a dark side, and it's captured in a Chinese saying, "Tall trees bear the brunt of high winds." The government can help firms grow, but when companies start wielding influence over public institutions or become so ruthless that they stir up public grievances, the government will rein them in. This means that the largest Chinese firms are never truly independent. High-profile companies like Alibaba and the property giant Evergrande that have drawn government attention are only one decision away from incurring the government's wrath. Let me tell you what happened in 2021. For 20 years, China allowed the tech sector free rein. It created many billionaires. It catapulted China's digital economy to the forefront of the global frontier. Nearly 100 companies worth more than $10 billion each emerged. Then the government decided that the time for letting them run loose should come to an end. Many of the largest tech companies were accused of exploiting monopoly power, using data to manipulate consumer preferences, illegally selling data to third parties. In 2021, the government introduced new restrictions on big tech, education, and gaming companies, fines for the most well-known internet companies in China: Alibaba, Meituan, Didi. The loss of $1 trillion in stock value for Chinese internet companies seemed to leave the government unfazed. This wasn't just regulation. This was a demonstration of power, a reminder that in China, no company is truly independent from the state. No matter how big you get, no matter how many billions you're worth, the benefit of being big in China is that its vast market brings hefty profits. But successful private companies have responsibilities and duties reminiscent of the old SOEs, providing services to aid the government during the pandemic, pledging funds for natural disaster recovery, When the state calls, you answer. This creates an impossible tension. Entrepreneurs need to be bold, innovative, rule breaking, but they also need to stay in line, respect boundaries, know when they've become too powerful. It's like driving a race car with one foot on the gas and one on the brake. And this brings me to the new generation of Chinese entrepreneurs. They're different from their predecessors, more educated, more sophisticated, more global, but also more cautious. Colin Huang, founder of Pinduoduo, studied at University of Wisconsin-Madison and worked for Google before returning to China. His gift was making bulk buying fun, creating a retail space where Costco meets Disney. Users participate in group buys with family and friends, raffles with great prizes, while getting access to consumer goods at exceedingly cheap prices. But Huang was equally astute when it came to politics. He steered clear of the media spotlight. He avoided ostentatious behavior. He quietly stepped down as CEO and chairman only a few years after founding one of the most successful internet companies in China. His departure wasn't necessarily good news for his company, its investors, or a country trying to foster talent. But it was smart. This new generation understands the rules better than their predecessors. They know that paradise and jungle coexist. They know that the government giveth and the government taketh away. They know that success brings scrutiny, and scrutiny can bring ruin, so they adapt. In 2017, JD.com set up an anti-corruption coalition with other internet companies. If an employee engaged in illicit behavior, they'd be blacklisted by the entire internet business community. Baidu established a group to investigate serious offenses. Meituan formed an ethics and conduct committee. Every year, they hand dozens of cases to the police. The existence of such committees would have been unimaginable for the previous generation. But this is the new normal. Higher standards, more regulation, less room for error. And this is where China finds itself today, trying to balance regulation and innovation, fairness and efficiency, common prosperity and entrepreneurial dynamism. It's an incredibly difficult balancing act. If the government is too heavy-handed, it will kill the entrepreneurial spirit that made China's private sector so successful. If it's too lenient, inequality will keep growing, monopolies will dominate, and public resentment will build. Here's what fascinates me about this story. It reveals something fundamental about how China works. The boundary between state and private enterprise isn't a straight line. It's more like the curve in a yin-yang symbol, where seemingly opposed elements are actually complementary. State-owned enterprises and private firms compete, collaborate, and coexist. They're partners and rivals. They help each other and hurt each other. They live in paradise and jungle simultaneously. And this is why understanding Chinese companies requires understanding this duality. It's not a simple story of free markets versus state control. It's a complex, evolving relationship where the rules keep changing, where yesterday's advantage becomes today's liability, where success can turn into failure overnight. The companies that thrive in this environment are the ones that master this duality. They know when to be bold and when to be cautious, when to push boundaries and when to respect them, when to seek government support and when to maintain distance. It's an exhausting way to do business. But it's also produced some of the most dynamic, innovative, and successful companies in the world. Companies that went from nothing to global giants in a single generation. The question now is, can this model continue? As China matures, as the easy growth is exhausted, as the government prioritizes quality over quantity, fairness over efficiency, will the jungle become more hospitable or more dangerous? Will paradise remain open to those who play by the rules? Or will the gates close? I don't have the answer. Nobody does. But I I know this. Whatever happens in China's corporate sector will shape the global economy for decades to come. Because Chinese companies aren't just competing in China anymore, they're competing globally, and they're bringing with them the lessons they learned surviving in paradise and jungle simultaneously. In the next episode, we're going to look at one of the most controversial aspects of China's transformation, the one-child policy. We'll explore how limiting families to one child for nearly 4 decades created a generation unlike any in human history. We'll look at the little emperors who grew up as the center of family attention, the unintended consequences of gender imbalance, and why this generation is reshaping everything from consumer behavior to marriage patterns to China's economic future. But it all connects back to this story of paradise and jungle. Because the companies that serve this new generation had to understand them better than any generation before. And the companies that succeeded did so by mastering the same duality: boldness and caution, innovation and compliance, pushing boundaries while respecting limits. Paradise and jungle, two worlds, one economy. This is how Chinese companies really work. And now you understand the shocking truth nobody talks about.